I'm going to infuse high frequency energy into entirety using overtones and a violet flame in my heart center. I'm going to do this by spreading this high frequency all throughout my physicality and energy bodies. So I will be vibrating profoundly high vibrational frequencies in my body and energy body. And I'm going to use the heart center and the violet flame in the heart center to supercharge, and overtones to supercharge infinite universes by knowing that everything resides in my physical body and energy body, because everything is interlinked. So when I'm supercharging my body, I'm supercharging infinite universes. It's a given. Everything is interconnected. Everything is one. So ready? Oh, 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 oh. Let's switch from overtones to channeled sounds with the same intention to supercharge everything with the highest vibration, with my physical body and my energy body as the vessel, in order to supercharge infinite universe with the highest vibration. Channeled sounds. D D D D D D D D D D D D D D da 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 D D D D D D D D D D D D D D da 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 dee 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 da 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 dee 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 da 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 D D D D D D D D D da 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 D D D D D D D D D D da 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 da. Feel the high vibrations. Feel it. Breathe it in. Feel it. Roar it. Bat it out with everything you have to everything. Full-fledgedly bat it out. Emanate it with your all. D D D D D D D D D D D D D D D D da 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 D D D D D D D D D da 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 D D D D D D D D D D D D D D D D D D D D da 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 da. I'm using my helpers, the 9D Acturian Council, the 9D Acturian Council that I am, and Saint Germain. Saint Germain is who I am. I'm using my helpers or my other selves to power these channeled sounds. D, 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 D. And again, therefore, infusing entirety with the highest of highest vibrations through my physical vessel and energy body. D, 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 D. Da, 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 da. D, 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 D. Da, 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 da. D, 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 D. Da, 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 da. D, 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 D. Da, 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 da. Thank you for listening.